All right, I see now streaming live.
You see it?
Mhm. All right, I think we're in business.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Priscilla Bravo and I'm the Women's Resource Center Director at the YWCA in High Point. And today we have a very special guest. Her name is Camila Dos Santos. She has a background in education and counseling, and she's currently the program coordinator at Healthy Relationship Initiative in Greensboro. Camila.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Priscilla. I really appreciate the partnership, and I'm really excited to be here today to talk to you a little bit about self-care and just finding the balance in this craziness that is the pandemic. And before we get started, I'd love to spend some time talking about the Healthy Relationships Initiative. We are a partnership between UNC Greensboro and the Phillips Foundation, and our mission is to promote happy, healthy, and safe relationships of all kinds. Prior to the pandemic, we did a lot of face-to-face relationship education programs. Since then, we've really shifted to provide online webinars and have also beefed up some of our relationship blogs and continue to provide daily resources for people to strengthen all of their relationships. So we encourage you to check us out on Facebook at Healthy Relationships Initiative and our website, www.guilfordhri.org.
Okay, are you able to see that slide?
Yes.
Okay. You want me to stop there or?
Sure. Yeah. So we hear so much about finding the balance during this time. And oftentimes I have people ask, what does that mean? What does finding the balance mean? And I think for today's purposes, because I think we can really talk a lot just about what balance is and what it looks like. But what's important to remember is that finding balance and feeling balanced, not only does it look different for everyone, but it really changes depending on what's going on in our lives. So instead of, for the purpose of this question, instead of talking about what it looks like, I'd like to spend some time talking about what it feels like. Because when we think about how things feel, then we know when we've reached that point, right? We know when we found that balance. But when we spend a lot of time thinking about what they look like, we might fall into the comparison game of comparing our lives and other people's balance to our own. So when we think about balance and what it feels like, it truly feels like being in tune with yourself and your needs emotionally and physically, right? So we might know those people in our lives, the people who have found balance, they're the ones, they're not necessarily always cool, calm, and collected, but instead they're the people who just find the time to intentionally fill their own bucket before they fill someone else's bucket. And for those of you who have been in the elementary or early childhood education world like I have, one of the books that I really enjoyed working with kids to talk about was Filling Your Own Bucket. And that concept has to do with we can't be good to other people if we're not good to ourselves first. So you might know that person in your life who, regardless of what's going on, in the midst of chaos, it seems like things are falling apart, they find time to work out, right? They find time to get their daily water intake. They're doing their self-care. They're getting that face mask on. They're reading for 10 minutes each day. People who found the balance know that it's something you need to intentionally work for every day. And they also know that it's most important to work on balance when we don't have the time for it, right? Because that's when we need it the most. So I guess to sum up sort of what it means to find the balance is, remember a couple of things. First, that it can change depending on what's going on in your life, especially during a pandemic, or just with what's going on in your particular life. So balance for someone with young children is going to look really different than balance for someone who maybe doesn't have children and isn't in a partner relationship, for example. So just keeping in mind that it can look a little bit different. And then also remembering that when we're thinking about balance and self-care, it's not always about what we want to do, right? And in fact, it's about doing what we need, even when we don't feel like doing it. So moving our bodies when we don't feel like it, right? Being intentional about drinking enough water, even though that seems like, not the biggest priority for that day. Just really being intentional and doing it when it's the hardest to do. And we'll talk about some ways to do that later on as well.
Okay. Let's move on to the second question.
Yeah.
How can I minimize stress during this time?
Yes, and I love this question because you're asking me how to minimize it instead of how to get rid of it, right? Because I think all of us pretty much know stress is here to stay, right? It's not going anywhere. It's very hard for us to imagine a world in which stress doesn't exist. But we also know that stress can be a good thing. Stress can be a motivator. It can help us find clarity for the things that are important to us. And when we can cope with our stress, it really keeps us motivated and sort of accomplishing our goals. Where stress becomes a problem, though, is when it sort of takes over our lives and takes over our ability to make good decisions, our ability to be patient with the people that we love. And so finding the balance between the stress is really important too. But since we know we can't get rid of it, let's talk about how to minimize it during this pandemic. And I thought of just 3 sort of basic but hard to do consistently things that can help minimize stress. And that first one really has to do with just having a plan for your week. Before the pandemic, you might have been that person who started your week with a to-do list, right? And knew what you wanted to accomplish that week. And you've got your meetings scheduled and your calendar, jam-packed and ready to go. And during this pandemic, you might have found, I know this is something that I dealt with, I struggled to sort of build my schedule and to adapt my calendar to the needs of just working from home and being home all the time. And so in the beginning of this pandemic, me, who I'm a big planner, I write everything down, I live for a good to-do list, I stopped doing those things because I wasn't sure if a to-do list was realistic right now, and I wasn't even sure what to put on it in the beginning, So I realized that I started to lose some focus. So my first tip to sort of minimize stress is to have a plan for each week and to carve out some time either on Sunday or Monday morning to think about the things you want to accomplish, but then also the things that maybe are sort of those goals you want them to happen, but it's okay if they don't happen that week. And sort of having these separate lists of must accomplish, would be great if I could accomplish. And when you do that, when you lay out all of your plans and everything you want to sort of do in a week, you're doing a couple of things there. You're preparing yourself to kind of gear up for what needs to be done. You're getting yourself focused on the priorities for that week, but you're also sort of minimizing the stress of not knowing what to do with those pockets of time that you might find throughout the day. So when you set some boundaries around your list and when you really write that out, you can minimize your stress just because you know what to expect from each week. I think it's important to have a disclaimer here, though, because we have to be flexible in the world of this pandemic, right? So don't necessarily think your week is a failure if you didn't accomplish all of the things you set out to accomplish. I would look at sort of your list or your plan as something that you want to very much achieve, but it's not the end of the world if you don't get everything done, because you don't want that list to add stress either. So the first thing is to just really plan ahead, but keep in mind that you might need to be flexible because things come up when we're spending so much time at home.
Correct.
My second tip has to do with just communicating across all of your relationships, communicating openly, communicating honestly, and then also communicating in a timely way. So we know that this pandemic has really caused stress in all areas of life for many people. And, our relationships, when they're functioning and when they're healthy, are a really great buffer against that stress and anxiety. But if they're not functioning very well, they can cause more stress and anxiety. So during this time, it's really important to just communicate your needs to the people in your life that you're having to interact with. And so whether that's professionally, letting your boss, or if you are the leader, letting your team know what the expectations are, letting them know, I'm here to support you if you need anything. And also saying, this is what I need in order to be productive. I need flexibility so that I can maybe work a little bit in the morning and a little bit in the evening because I've got to take care of my kids. And really being open about what you need is going to minimize conflict down the road. And when we minimize conflict, we minimize stress. And so communicating across all relationships with our partner, with our children, our professional relationships, our relationships with family, the more honest we are and the more timely we let people know about what's going on with us, the less stress we'll feel during this time.
Thank you. Those are very good tips. And yeah, they're very helpful because believe it or not, we're all going through this at the same time, and some of this stuff is new to all of us. So I appreciate those tips.
Sure thing. And I've got one more that kind of has to do with sort of like the basics. And I think what happens during a pandemic is, or any time of chaos, is that we sort of lose sight of the little things that we do to take care of ourselves that is really important right now, right? So when we think about minimizing stress, keep it simple. Drink water. Make sure you're getting sleep, right? Take a walk outside. Don't underestimate the significance of those little things because they're more important than ever now. I noticed the other day that if I didn't get up and go outside for a walk, I would have been at my computer desk for almost 8 hours, which is something that prior to the pandemic, I wouldn't have done, right? I mean, we work often together. So, we're in meetings, you're doing all sorts of different things. But when we're all stuck at home, we lose sight of how much time we spend in one particular place. So I think it's important to really just, move your body to minimize stress, drink that water, get some vitamin D. These things seem simple, but they add up.
Correct. Very true. Let's go on to the next question. What are some ways that I can cope with the added stress of the pandemic?
Yes, absolutely. I'm sure we're all just feeling very stressed, and we're seeing the effects of that stress in a lot of different ways: physical, emotional, mental, and certainly our relationships could be impacted as well. So because we can't completely rid ourselves of stress, it's important to find ways to cope. And so I've just got some practical tips that I hope people can kind of take away and use in the way that makes sense for them. And so my first one has to do with just sort of having fun and taking advantage of those spontaneous moments of fun when we're home with the people that we love. And so whatever that looks like for you, I know that in my world, that's meant a lot more playtime with our dogs, and just really taking advantage of the fact that people are home, so we can do video calls with family members that were on completely different schedules before. We can do fun things like sing-alongs and recording dances and sending those videos to make someone laugh. So having fun during this time might not seem like a priority, but it's a great way to just deal with stress. And in general, just find some joy during a time that's been really challenging for us all. You're going to hear me say this a lot in this next 30 minutes, but move your body. I can't say it enough. And it doesn't have to be, run 10 miles every day. Do something to get active, get outside in your garden, walk around your yard if you can. You'll see lots of challenges online, the 10 push-up challenge, or the sit up against a wall and squat, for 30 seconds. This is important because when you move your body, you're releasing endorphins that make us happy, that make us smile, right? And this is going to be a great way to deal with stress. So use sort of sweat as a way to cope with stress.
Yes. And even if you're not push-ups or sit-ups, at least try. Just try.
Yeah, try. They don't have to be perfect. That's the beauty of being home. You don't have to worry about somebody looking at you at the gym. Do what you need to do and try different things out, and get creative with it too, because it doesn't necessarily have to be a run. Yoga is a great exercise, and there's a lot of videos that can guide you through those things too. I think what's important is just move your body and do it every day, and do it in a way that feels right for you.
Yes, we do have my coworker Austin and Charlie doing videos weekly, every other day, for like 7-minute exercises and stuff like that. So it's very easy to find ways to do it.
Yeah, I've absolutely loved those live sessions that you are all doing too. Getting
I try them, believe me, but I get tired after like the 4th minute. So
That's how you know it's working. That's how you know it's working. Some other tips I just kind of jotted down were, this is a great time to just maybe try something new, maybe pick up an old hobby that you haven't done in a while. So whether, you played an instrument before and then life got in the way, or maybe you've always wanted to join a book club, but just never had the time. Or maybe you wanted to improve your yoga practice, but just weren't able to squeeze that into your busy schedule. So, trying something new could be a great way to minimize stress. But I say that sort of with an asterisk too, because what we want to do during this time is give ourselves grace and not stress ourselves more. So what you don't want to do is, join a book club and then have more appointments that stress you out that you need to make. Or now you've got to read this chapter with no time. So, keeping in mind that we want to minimize stress, not add to it. But for some people, picking up a new activity might minimize stress for them right now because they might have added time on their hands. So just finding that balance between being fair to yourself, being realistic with what you might be able to accomplish, but then also maybe getting creative and trying something new if that's what you feel like you need to do.
excellent.
Couple other things, through the Healthy Relationships Initiative, we put out a lot of resources to help support people, but we also say, if you're struggling to deal with stress in this pandemic and it's really taking a toll, there's a lot of online mental health services that can be really helpful during this time. So connecting with a telecounselor, if you find that you're just having a hard time coping, might be a great way for you to cope with stress. Or, another thing would be doing something for someone else. There's a really good feeling that we get when we accomplish a task for someone else or we do a favor for someone else. And that feeling of accomplishment helps us de-stress. So again, we don't want the strategies that we put in place to minimize stress to potentially stress us more down the line. So it's important to be honest about what you can and cannot do. And also remember, it's okay to say no, right? We can say, no, I can't do that, or no, I don't have the time for that. Sometimes that's the best strategy you can use.
That is, I found that to be very true. Don't overdo yourself. Don't
Right.
do more than you can handle.
And it's human nature to kind of keep everything going, and we don't want the ship to sink, but sometimes we just need to kind of stop and think about what are our needs right now, and sometimes it means that you can't take on anything else.
True. Let's move on to the next question. I've never really practiced self-care before. Where do I start? That would be me right there.
Well, and even if you've practiced self-care for years, you might find that your self-care practice has kind of fallen off to the side in the midst of this pandemic. So, even if you haven't done it before, you could feel like you're starting all over again. So what's important to remember about self-care is that it is definitely overused and misrepresented in our society. All you have to do is scroll through Instagram or Facebook or any kind of outlet, and you can really see some misrepresentations of self-care. That weekend trip to an island or the day-long adventure at the spa. These are great things, and if you can financially afford that and make that happen, awesome. But it's not necessary to have a self-care routine. And so when we think about starting now, start simple. So I mentioned earlier kind of the basics, right? Drinking water, moving your body, getting enough sleep. Those things sound really simple, but they're self-care. That taking care of your body in a physical way is going to be probably one of the most powerful self-care regimens that you can do for your mental health. Because when our bodies feel balanced and well, our minds are moving in that direction too. So just eating healthy, making sure you're getting your water intake in, taking a nap if you just need a nap in the middle of the day and you're fortunate enough to, not be able to take that nap. I know not everybody's that fortunate.
Mm-mm.
Another thing that stood out to me about sort of starting with self-care is recently through the Healthy Relationships Initiative, we had a relationship booster, and we had a creativity and life coach come on and speak. Her name's Alicia Wilfort. She operates in the Greensboro area, but her work is widespread. And she mentioned something that resonated with me, and I hope it will resonate with all of you. And it's that, we're living in a world that really praises multitasking, right? The more you can accomplish at the same time, the more productive you are, the more efficient you are, the more successful you are. But actually, that's not always the case. And so sometimes we really need to go back to something as simple as doing one thing at a time. And so for those of us who might be tuning in on Facebook, when's the last time that you, and maybe even this question is for you too, Priscilla, because I know I asked myself this question, but when's the last time you sat in front of your meal during lunch and did nothing but eat your lunch? Focus on chewing your food, drinking your water. We don't do that, right? We eat lunch in front of the computer. We're going to send off an email while we get that last bite of our sandwich in. And we view that as success in our society. But actually, that can lead to even more stress because we're just juggling so many things at once and you're sort of never slowing down, right? So if you've never practiced self-care before and you have no clue where to start by doing one thing at a time. Eat your lunch, chew your food, drink your water. And you'll find that those things start to add up, right? So maybe focus more on one task instead of single or multitasking.
Yes, and yeah, I think a lot of people see multitasking as a way to be really good at everything you do, but it's like, it's the first time I'm hearing it that it's not. It's, it's the opposite.
Yeah, and sometimes life calls for multitasking, right? There's certain things you can't avoid. Moms know this. They are excellent multitaskers. And sometimes, when we have a lot of things going on and not enough time, we find ourselves doing 2 or 3 things at once. But as much as possible, if we can stick to one task at a time, especially during this pandemic, you'll feel just less stress. You'll feel more accomplished too. There's something to be said about doing a task and finishing it, right? And so that sense of accomplishment might also minimize stress. And then finally, when we're talking about self-care, is don't sort of, how like when you're going to start a diet, you always want to start on Monday. So you're like starting the week fresh and you're like, you're going to get that full weekend. Self-care doesn't have to work like that. You don't have to necessarily have 1 hour each day. And, it doesn't have to take hours. When we sort of succumb to the mindset that self-care is this time-intensive, emotional investment, we're less likely to do it, right? Because it's this big thing. But if we think of self-care as just a couple of things that we can do for ourselves each day, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there, not only does that time add up, I actually went ahead and, did the math. 10 minutes of self-care every day is about 60 hours a year. And I don't know that many of us spend 60 hours a year on ourselves. So even if you just kind of start with that goal of 10 minutes a day, that at the end of it, you've at least spent 60 hours working on yourself. So to kind of recap, make it simple, do one thing at a time, and it doesn't have to take hours.
Okay, that's pretty impressive on the 60 hours.
Numbers make a difference, right? When you put it in numbers, you're more inclined to actually do it.
True. Okay, let's see. How can I get my family involved in practicing self-care?
Yes, that's always sort of the follow-up question once we hear, how can I do self-care? How can I get my family involved? And it can be hard enough to get ourselves sort of on an individual self-care plan. But here are some tips to kind of get the family involved. Make it fun if you can, right? So self-care can be artistic, doing arts and crafts, doing those sing-alongs, those dancing videos, going outside. As much as you can make it fun, you're more likely to get family kind of on board, especially younger kids. When we're talking about family self-care, as much as you can really keep it on the active side, that's going to keep everybody engaged. So, just working out together, maybe gardening in the backyard, doing things that are active as a family are not only a great way to connect and a bond emotionally, it's also just great self-care for the family and a great de-stressor too. Like anything, when I'm talking with parents, the most powerful thing you can do is lead by example. So if you're consistent in your self-care, your family will see the changes in you and they'll want to achieve them as well. So sometimes there's no better way to motivate other people than to just do it yourself. And when they start to see that what you're doing is working, they're going to want a piece of that too, right? Keeping it short and sweet, like I mentioned with self-care, I think in general, it's more likely to be attainable if we keep it short and sweet. So maybe you come up with family routines, like maybe every day you'll end the day by saying one thing that you're grateful for, or maybe you'll end the day by saying one thing that somebody in the family did to make your day easier. Or maybe the family goes on walks with no devices. But by sort of instilling these rituals and doing them every day, keeping them short and sweet, right? So it's realistic. You're doing it as a family and you're moving through that self-care regimen as a family. And then finally, remember that self-care doesn't always have to be done as a family for the family to benefit. So allowing family members to pick what works for them, whether, maybe somebody in the family really enjoys being active, but maybe somebody else really enjoys journaling. Letting the family do what works for them, but then maybe coming back together to reflect on it is a really great way to do self-care as a family, but maybe not put a ton of pressure on family members during that process. And then finally, pick your battles. We don't want self-care to be added stress. So if they don't want to jump on board right away, that's okay, right? What you don't want to do is stress yourself more by getting your family, by getting everybody stressed about self-care. So I think picking your battles, recognizing that, if you want to go for your walk, but your kids don't, that's okay. Maybe they'll want to go for a walk the next day. And so really picking your battles here is going to be important to just not cause added stress.
Yes, I think one of the hardest parts would be to get them away from the devices.
Yes, I'm seeing that too. And, just a little plug here for parents that are struggling with that. Extra screen time right now is to be expected. And you can give yourself some grace there because I think we're all just doing the best we can. And kids are just on screens right now. That's the reality. But what's important is when life goes back to normal, and hopefully it will soon, we'll all kind of jump right back into sort of our self-regulating routines. But right now we're all just doing the best we can. So added screen time is okay.
Okay.
It's coming up a lot when I talk to parents during this time.
Yeah, I bet it is. The other question is, what are some healthy relationship strategies to keep relationships strong right now?
Sure. And so we know that relationships of all kinds could be struggling with this pandemic right now. And typically, the problems that were in place before the pandemic probably feel more highlighted or more exacerbated now. And that's very normal. But on the bright side, all of the strengths that were there before the pandemic are still there. And so you can capitalize on those strengths in your relationships to really get through this time. And so my first tip is to just build and work on your general relationship skills, such as communication, navigating conflict. I mentioned earlier the importance of communicating open and honestly, but also in a timely way. We don't want things to build up and sort of grow into bigger problems. We want to address them right when they happen, especially right now. And having strong relationship skills is always important. So working on them now will also serve you later. We've got a lot of free resources through HRI to kind of help couples and other types of relationships bond and connect right now. So I encourage you to check us out and take a look at those resources. So while we're talking about, building those skills and focusing on the general relationship skills that sort of we see in all healthy relationships, it's also really important to remember that we're living in a very unprecedented time. And so what we all need right now is grace and patience, especially our partners and our spouses. This is uncharted territory. And so we can't expect ourselves or anyone to handle things perfectly. And you might see things in your relationships that you might not have seen before. You know, people are experiencing lack of patience, stress, and these things seep out into our relationships in different ways. So the best thing you can really do is have patience, give yourself grace, remind yourself constantly that none of us really know what we're doing right now. And so we all just have to kind of be a little bit more patient with how we interact with one another.
True.
A couple of other things is making time for positive connections. You'll probably see some reoccurring themes here. I'm saying things like communicate. I'm saying things like have fun, make positive connections, prioritize that. I think one of the things that we tend to do as adults especially is we throw fun out the window when life gets stressful. But fun is one of the best medicines for stress. So while you might not be able to have your normal date night, you might not be able to do the things that you would typically do to connect in your relationships, you can get creative about how you connect. So some ideas can be, you know, taking a walk, not talking about the pandemic, cooking a meal together, having your own personal book club. I know within my family, we're doing just regular Zoom sessions and they tend to be themed. So everybody kind of comes to the table with some idea of, you know, we're going to talk about this, or we're going to reminisce about this. And so having sort of these themed virtual nights can be helpful too. Working on arts and crafts, engaging in dancing and singing and all of these things, you know, it sounds sort of silly when we think about that, when we think about prioritizing that, but that's a really great de-stressor. And it's also a really great way to keep our relationship strong. You know, you might have found that when you have fun with your partner or your spouse, you feel really connected in that moment. So that's really important right now. And then finally, you know, if I could say this with like a big sign, now is not the time to overhaul our relationships. So now's not the time to sort of work on the things that we wanted to work on before this pandemic, or to, you know, lay everything out on the line with our partners. And it's just not that time, right? So what we can do, however, is you can focus on maybe one or two things that you both want to work on. So establish those priorities, whether it's, you know, we might need to communicate a little bit better, or we might need to find different ways to divide up the priorities at home so I'm feeling less stressed. Whatever that looks like, take some time to kind of figure out what your priorities are and then work on those small pieces, right? So try to tackle small pieces instead of working on a relationship overhaul right now. Now's probably not the best time.
Yeah. And as you said, just be patient. You know,
Yeah.
just be patient first and foremost, be patient because there's a lot going on. And also I wanted to mention, especially with being quarantined or being away from family members in other states and people that you're used to seeing, now it's the best time to do, like you're saying, the Zoom meetings. Even if you do them all day for work, I think it's important to stay in touch with your other family members that are not right next to you. So.
Right. And even if you feel like it might not be important for you that day, you could really be making somebody else's day, right? So that Zoom call might seem like a little bit of a burden for you, but it can brighten up somebody in your family's day who, you know, maybe they don't have interactions with someone else because they live alone, or maybe they're feeling very stressed because they lost their job. And so, you know, being there for others is a really great way to strengthen our relationships as well.
Mm-hmm. Okay, this next question is, what are some practice tips for finding balance in the pandemic?
Yes, I'm all about the practical tips because I think sometimes when we think very theoretically, it's hard for us to imagine what it looks like in our day-to-day lives. So I've come up with just some different things that people can take and adapt and make work for them. But the first sort of point is to remember that balance does look different for everyone. And it really changes depending on what's going on in your life. So whether you're single, whether you're married, whether you are co-parenting, or you're in a demanding job, or you're out of a job, all of these factors affect what balance looks like. So the first sort of practical tip is to avoid the comparison game right now. We're spending a lot of time at home. We're spending a lot of time scrolling. And sometimes when we're scrolling, we find ourselves comparing to others, whether you're comparing yourself to that mom who's got all of those visual schedules all over the house and everything just seems to be functioning really well in her home, right? Or whether you're sort of comparing yourself to the people who get to go on a weekend trip in the midst of all of this. And so comparing yourself is not going to be something that's going to de-stress you right now. On that note, set realistic expectations. Set expectations for you and for your family that work. Now is not the time for pie in the sky goals. And that's coming from someone who's highly ambitious. I'm the one with tons of pie in the sky goals. Let's be realistic right now, right? So remembering not to compare ourselves to others, avoiding the temptation to kind of rate your parenting based on what you see out there in the world, or rate your relationship based on what you saw on somebody's social media account. Really focusing in on your family and your needs during this pandemic and figuring out what success looks like for you. I was talking to a friend of mine and she said it best. She said, some days we get all the homework assignments done. We get virtual Zoom classes, we're reading books. Other days, it's a miracle if we eat and get to bed on time. And that's okay. Sometimes that's balance, right? It's not always going to be perfect, and being okay with that. Some other sort of tips to find balance can be, just focusing on that self-care, like I mentioned, and keeping it simple. Going back to the basics right now. Are you getting water? Are you eating well? Are you sleeping? Are you moving your body? And then finally, don't underestimate the power of the positive connections we can make right now, whether it's with the people that we interact with very closely or whether it's just with strangers. I know on my street, we've had the same FedEx guy for about a month and he's working so hard. He's dropping off packages up and down the street. And so the other day, I just kind of left a little water bottle with some hand sanitizer and a thank you note. And he later expressed, on a different day, socially distant, how much that really just impacted his day. And that made me feel good, that I was able to make somebody else smile. Very little thing that I did, but that connection had me smiling all day. So really not underestimating the importance of the small things right now.
Small gestures, yes. Which in reality is a big gesture because everyone's looking for hand sanitizer. So
true. I had some extras. I don't know that I would have done that a month ago when things were really bad, but I've been able to stock up a little. And that's what I have for tips on sort of finding the balance.
I think all these questions were excellent and the answers are phenomenal. I just want to thank you for everything you're doing, providing the knowledge, the information, because we all need it. Everyone's going through a hard time. So I appreciate the partnership and your time for being with us today and answering all these questions from our clients. And thank you.
Thank you. Thank you as always for being such a good partner for us. And we encourage you to connect with HRI. A lot of what I mentioned here today, we have resources to support that work and to get you started. So we encourage you to check out our website, www.guilfordhri.org, as well as our social media at Healthy Relationships Initiative. And you'll see we've got some exciting other programs in this series. I'll let you talk about that, Priscilla.
Yes, next Monday, we're going to have Dr. Christine Murray, and she will be talking about supporting someone in an abusive relationship. So the time is going to be the same from 2 to 2:30. If you would like to join us next Monday to discuss this topic.
All right, awesome. And I'll be tuned in too. So thank you so much, Priscilla.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye.